buyer.
Yeah, it's so true. So for those of you, interested in the ETA space, thinking, I'd love to buy a small business or get involved in a small business. This is going to be kind of jam-packed for you. Um, so Daniel, give everyone who's listen to our live stream and out just a brief introduction.
Sure. So really, I started out in the technology industry. I spent 27 years there, and I saw people starting their own business from technology that uh, they would just go off and start a tech company, mostly tech services, right? And they would start it up, get it up to 1 to 3 million in revenue, somewhere in there, and then they would shut it down because it became an HR problem instead of a tech problem to solve. And I saw that over and over and over again. So I finally decided I was going to figure out how to make this work for myself. So I started as an individual acquirer. I was, doing self-funded ETA. There were several partners I was looking around with in different groups to see who could come up with a good acquisition. And we did our first acquisition about 6+ years ago. The here's something that most acquirers don't tell you is your first acquisition is your learning acquisition. There's always something that you're going to learn, and sometimes you can survive it. But it's always where you learn a ton about the things you hadn't thought of. So I had, and honestly, it took me 2 years to get that first acquisition. And since then, we've done 5 acquisitions and are active in 3 right now that are in due diligence, and we have several others that we're probably going to go to LOI here soon with. And this is just so I worked large corporate most of my career, and this I'm enjoying so much more.
It's so true. And I really appreciate that overview. The first acquisition is certainly a learning curve, and there's so many there's so many probably tough lessons you digested after that. So for those of you navigating this for the first time, take that with a grain of salt and buy a business that can support a loan with the hopes of purchasing a good business for future growth, because if you buy the wrong business at the wrong terms, you may only get one shot, which I'm sure you can relate to that.
Absolutely. Like most people, we bought too small to start with, and there's a lot of problems with that.
Yeah, I'm sure. And that's an entirely different conversation around operating and et cetera. We could probably have a few different webinars and discussions on that.
Absolutely.
So um, what are some of the typical searcher problems you see out there?
So there's a handful of things that the searchers I talk to, and listen, the only reason I know anything about this industry is because I think I've made most of the mistakes now, at least once. So that's the only way I've learned anything, and the only reason I know anything. So I made these same mistakes, all of them. But one of the first mistakes is the sourcing piece. A lot of searchers look at as just something they got to get out of the way and just do, but it's not their main job. Their main job is to get that business and run it. But the reality is, you've got to figure out a regular flow of businesses that you evaluate. Because if you're looking at broker-led companies, the numbers pre-COVID numbers, I don't know if they've redone them, where you're going to acquire one for every 100 that you successfully look at. I mean, seriously look at those. I know in the investment banking world, on the tail end of COVID, they were looking at 148 to get one. So not taking the sourcing seriously and not really having a plan for sourcing is where searchers waste a ton of time.
Yeah. Um, Not understanding, small business finance. What do you mean by that?
So the guys that I meet, the guys and gals that I meet that do ETA work, they're brilliant, and a lot of them have the MBA with financial concentration, and so they know all about big company finance, which I like to say the difference between big company finance and small business finance is big company finance, you're drinking from a fire hose and trying to pick out the critical elements to make a picture of what's going on in the company. Small business, you're trying to dig through to find any data and make reasonable implications from the data you actually have. Small businesses have very little data and they operate very differently than large businesses financially. And so it's not that you can't learn small business if you know one or the other way around. It's just that most people go into this assuming that all business finance is the same, and that's just not the case.
Yeah. And I agree, small businesses without a CFO or without some middle management is just a different it's just a different company, and there's different, there's pros and cons to that.
Yeah,
More upside without, that middle management in place, but there's also downsides. There may be, lack of sophistication,
maybe.
things that you're kind of used to. So I certainly agree.
Yeah. So the first company, this is the common experience, right? If you get a company, now you're in there, you're operating, you're trying to learn. Hopefully, the owner is sticking around for a significant amount of time so that you can learn from the owner. But you're trying to learn how to run this business while doing all the things you want to do to make it better. And inevitably, when you acquire and are left on your own in leadership, the business is going to take a little bit of a dip because you haven't figured out all the little things to even ask about that the owner also didn't think to tell you about or didn't want to tell you about. Either way. And so the business takes a dip, and you've got to get it all figured out and how to fix that before the company collapses. So it's a, I mean, it is the perfect pressure cooker environment for somebody who learns under pressure. But yeah, you got a clock. It's ticking, and you got to figure it out.
Yeah, and this gauntlet of figuring it out is what I like to call the J curve, which is
Hmm.
just that, and it has significant risks. So for those who are worried about, am I trying to figure it out? Can I do it? Concerned about the J curve? What do you say to people who ask that question?
Yes, yes, you should be concerned. First answer. So the challenge is, first of all, realizing that there's going to be a significant amount of stuff you don't know. Coming at this the first time, everybody thinks they know all about business, and they do. But again, they don't know what they don't know unless they've run a small business before. And so now it's the question is, are you going to be open enough to learn while you jump in? Or are you going to try and resist what's trying to be taught to you by this business in order to say, no, it works like this? Every business has momentum, and you've got to learn about that business and where it's headed and how to turn it around. And that takes time.
Yeah, certainly. What kind of businesses do you think, or have you seen in some of the ones you've purchased that are easier to kind of pick up, or
Mhm.
harder? Like, what are industries some people who may not know what to buy like should avoid?
Oh, so there are very niche industries that you should avoid. Oil and gas is one of them. It's just a whole natural resources generally is a whole different world with a whole different business model. So it's operating in a business model where the root product is changing in value all the time, no matter what you do. So it's a different world. So I would stay clear about that unless you had experience in oil and gas or whatever natural resource. You could be mining for copper. Argentina discovered a huge copper mine. I would not jump into that business if I didn't mine copper before. So that's one of them. I'd say medical is very niche. The closer you get to the caregiving, the more regulations there are that you're just not going to know about. So direct medical, I would is a dangerous niche unless you've been there. Otherwise, I'm sure there are lots of everything regulated, right? So the more regulated the business, the more there are things that you don't know that are going to bite you.
Right. Yeah,
Um,
and I agree. And in practice, what I see in the market today is things you mentioned. Niche areas of the market, or businesses that are just very specific and have benefited from the legacy owner being in place are very hard to learn,
mhm.
especially for a new business owner in general. If you think about searchers, if you are a first-time business operator, you have to learn how to run a business, which is a job in itself. And then it's almost like you're buying two businesses because then you have to learn how to run the business, which operates in a very specific space. So,
Yeah.
if you're looking to buy a business, or a new business searcher, just choose wisely and set your own expectations of what you want to run and what can you run before you sign that personal guarantee if you're using an SBA loan.
Definitely.
Yeah.
Definitely.
Number four.
And then so the one of the challenges to being a searcher is you're not what the seller had in mind, which basically is they want to sell to themselves. They want to find who is the person like me. And the unfair part of all this is they don't want to sell to themselves when they started. They want to sell to themselves now because they know how much they didn't know when they started. So they're looking for somebody like themselves to sell to. And generally speaking, a searcher is not it. They want to their ideal person to sell to is, the guy who runs the similar business the next town over. If they could find that person and they were willing to spend as much as they were asking, that would be perfect. But the searcher is rarely who they're actually looking for when they're looking for a buyer.
Yeah, it's a good point. And there's a whole set of, other tips and tricks of how to differentiate yourself as a searcher. In instances where, you may not be the first bid, typically you as a searcher will need to have a human element of carrying legacy, not being that traditional private equity buyer who wants to buy it and then flip it. Um, because ultimately, if you're a self-funded searcher or maybe even a smaller independent sponsor, you can't compete with pure private equity on a dollars and cents basis, typically, not always. So it's just things to kind of think about.
Yeah.
So if we transition into, what are some of the steps? Let's start with, just step one, operate.
So what we're looking for when we are trying to find our operator. So when we acquire now, we put an operator in place. That's why we restrict our geography and the industries to three that we have some deep experience in, because we not only have, having experience in the industry gives you a little x-ray vision into the company, but also you've got a pool of people you've worked with that you can put into the business as an operator. So when we're looking for an operator, we're always looking for somebody who has gotten experience working inside of a business, ideally responsible for a P&L. That's the big one. And that's something that honestly not a lot of people have generally.
Right.
So that's a challenge because so the amount here's the way I put it to some other searchers. The amount of profit equals the amount of mistakes you can make. And often that runs out way before you can stop making mistakes. So the more you know about what's going on, the more if you're going to sign an operator, the better. So what we recommend to a lot of searchers is that you get inside a business. Chief of staff is a good role that we advise. So that can be for another searcher who's already acquired. That can be certainly for much larger, a PE, larger independent sponsor like us. We're still small, but other companies out there that have things in place, but you could become a chief of staff. So you become the right-hand man to whomever is running the company. And in doing that, it's a lot of scut work, don't get me wrong, but you're going to learn about how that business works by observing the main operator and how they do what they do. So that chief of staff role, you're going to learn a ton about how a business runs without the business and its success riding on your shoulders.
Right. It's an interesting value prop. So for those of you who may have kind of lost us on this slide, basically what Daniel is proposing is to step in as that chief of staff before the transition period. Is that correct?
Yeah, exactly. So if you've got a company you really like, a different route to go is to say, Mr. Seller, Miss Seller, here's what I propose. I propose I step in as your chief of staff. And you continue to run it for another year to 2 years or whatever they agree to, right? But year to 2 years, act like I am one of your children and you're trying to hand the business off to me. You will get the best chance that this business will continue operating like it is because their concern is they want to keep it going. I will get to learn exactly how your business operates. So I will be the ideal operator for when the time comes when you actually step out. You'll also get a good feel for when is the right time to step out. Because it could be before the agreed upon period, right? They could say, no, you're doing great. You got this. And you can also bring your new ideas and improve the business.
Yeah, it's an interesting value proposition and something that is I haven't heard of in ETA space. So how have you seen it work in practice? Like
So
how
I've seen it.
long does it take? Like what does that look like?
So I've seen it work two ways. One is where you are the ETA person, you're approaching the business, and you say, "Let me be your chief of staff." I've seen them do that. Now the challenge there is unless you basically write the contract to sell the business up front, what happens in a number of those situations is the seller, decides, nah, I don't feel like it anymore. I know I've used up a year of your life, but nah, I don't feel like it. I'm gonna keep going. Your ideas are great. I'm gonna keep using them. So the trick is you're basically writing a contract to sale at the front end, but there's such a long tail period where the owner and what is the chief of staff now, what will become the operator later, uh, are working together. So I've seen it work, but I've seen a lot of people burned by that because the owner eventually has buyer's remorse, seller's remorse, and decides, nope, I'm kicking you out. I'm going to keep going. And then the other way is the standard way PE works is this same sort of thing. They take people, and each PE operates differently, but they take people and they will put operators in businesses in order to do just this. And they will often have some of their junior people rotate through the businesses to be able to learn how to do this. It's kind of in their case, when you've got a big portfolio, it's a kind of a temporary chief of staff. You do 3 months here and 3 months there and 3 months. So what used to be the junior executive program.
Yeah.
And so you're learning how businesses operate by being inside of them, which is, I don't know that there's a school that teaches how businesses operate, honestly. The only way I know that you can learn this stuff is by doing it.
Right. Yeah, and I when you first brought me this not idea because it's been in practice, but more of a different angle to ETA. I do like it, just given some of the challenges I've seen with new business buyers. The fear is, and rightfully so, it's the potential for the owner to basically kick you to the curb once they feel like it, without really anything to show for it. And
Yep.
I guess what other like safeguards, and this may I may answer my own question of just do business with good people, but like how do you prevent that from happening?
So that's why you're signing this contract of sale at the beginning. So basically, they have contractually said, yes, I'm selling this to you. And if you've got a good lawyer, you put in all of the little reps and warranties, including if you decide to kick our guy to the curb, he still owns a minimum of X% of your company. You put all of that in the contract so that even if it works out poorly, you've ended up in a better position. But you're basically protecting against bad behavior on their part while agreeing to sell the business. Now, you don't have to sell the business for a specific price. You can say, we agree on how profit is figured, and at the end of this 12 or 24 months, which is normal, it's one of those. Could be longer, but it's usually one of those. We're going to buy the business from you at 4x whatever the last trailing 12 months is, or whatever you decide. So the wonderful thing about this kind of world of buying businesses is anything you can agree to, you can put into a contract. So you could agree to buy it for pogo sticks. You could agree that you are obligated to deliver to them 50 chocolate chip cookies every month for the rest of your life. Whatever it is, it's the agreement, and you work that out with them up front, get them to sign that, and then you step in. Otherwise, you're completely at their mercy.
Yeah, it's an interesting, and I'm asking questions just as someone who's been in the M&A space for over a decade. This
Mhm.
is a unique proposition. So how does like the change of like on a dollars and cents basis, like what does that look like? So let's say I've done my time, I've done my penance. Do I just assume the duties of the business or ownership? Like what does that look like?
Yeah. So think of it as a 2 year, if it's a 24-month agreement. Think of it as we're going to agree to sell the business for either this price or this formula. and it's a 2-year delayed down payment. So you do your time in the business, and then at a 2-year point, you do the thing you would be doing now, except for now you know the business inside and out. So now
Gotcha.
you're going to say, okay, here's your down payment. The rest is over time, whatever you've agreed to. At that point, the owner steps out because you already know how to do all this, and you continue operating. But the difference is you've had a nice runway where you've learned all the ins and outs of this business, and the mistakes you were about to make, the owner has kept you from making. And so you already know so much more by the time you make that down payment.
Yeah, it's interesting. I'd be curious how the SBA looks at that, given there's like some thresholds. I know that's not your wheelhouse being an independent sponsor, but there is some rules and restrictions around like partial buyouts, just effective even June 1st, 2025.
Yeah, it's all different now. Yeah.
Yeah, so if you are tuning in, you're thinking about an SBA loan as part of this equation, just make sure this is in line with, some of the SBA regulations, which unfortunately seem to be changing quite frequently. But needless to say, in theory, assuming this passed the SBA sniff test, this could be a viable option.
Well, so the great thing about the SBA in this particular case is that your contract to sale can just specify, at the 18-month point, we will engage the SBA to effectively now you're doing an MBO, which is a lower risk in the management buyout. The SBA loves those more than they love just buying a business. And in fact, it also means you have more options because you're doing an MBO. But if you want to use the SBA, that's fine. So you've got a contract to sale that says we're doing this for 2 years, but it can say at 18 months we will engage the SBA to get the funding to do all this. And that gives you plenty of time, plenty of runway to arrange the funding. Again, you're a lower risk proposition at that point. And so you can usually do even less down in those situations. And you'll have it in place by your close date, not by the SBA's close date.
Interesting. Yeah, you are. I do agree. The SBA does prefer almost like a management buyout of technically, if you're with a business for 6, 12, 18, 24 months at this point, you would certainly be viewed as a key employee. And
Absolutely.
the SBA is very favorable towards that because it just lessens risk
Right.
at new operator. So that is a proposition they could certainly get behind, having worked with several SBA lenders. So step 2, build trust.
Exactly. So now you're going to be inside this business, and it's the same as if you bought it as if you stepped in as the chief of staff. You're going to be reviewed as the weird new guy. That's part of the deal. But by doing this, you're able to operate in the business. Again, the owner's still there. So everybody's saying, yeah, you're a little bit weird and you got some strange ideas, but that owner's still there, so I feel okay about things. And over the period of that 12 to 24 months, you now understand all of the players, you understand the customers, you understand, even if you haven't mapped it out, you understand the process map for how we get from order to delivery, all of that stuff. And now when you take over the company, even if it wasn't announced that that's what the plan was, you come to the end of 12 or 24 months and the owner says, yeah, I'm going to transition the company to this person, I'm selling to them. They're like, oh, that's business as usual, no big deal. So you're able to build that trust within the business before you even acquire. And it, again, that reduces the big problem that a lot of people have their first business where the employees all just go, phew.
Right.
You lose people, they don't know you, they don't want to know you. You are in a much better situation.
Yeah, and I imagine this sort of slow ownership transition leads to hardly, the business might not skip a beat.
Exactly.
No J curve, et cetera,
Or at
because
least less. Yeah.
at least less. Yeah. Right.
Yeah. So I mean, you may still save your biggest ideas for after you actually officially acquire it, if only because generally the owner isn't big about great, fantastic, new, very different ideas. But you can introduce lots of little ideas over the period that will improve things. I mean, if you say, hey, we ought to advertise on Facebook. They're gonna say, Facebook? Why do I care about Facebook? What's that? I don't do Facebook. I turn wrenches. I do whatever. Cool. Well, if you don't mind, let's do a little Facebook advertising. It'll cost less than this. We'll see if it brings in any business. I'm like, yeah, whatever. Go ahead. Go for it.
Right.
And you can prove yourself or not, right?
Right. Yeah, I mean, trust is a component, is such a key component to these transition periods. Trust with customers, trust with vendors. Um, I talk about this frequently and I post about it is it's almost like a trust test. I like to call it in the beginning of the transition period. So there's a trust test by the employees. You're the new owner, the new guy. There's a trust test with customers to the business you bought. And then there's a trust test to the vendors, you may source your materials from. So how they test you may be nice, it might not be nice in the forms of, you know, all of a sudden now you have to pay 30 days when invoices are sent rather than it used to be 90 days. So
Right.
building this trust early in the process, it can't be stated enough how important it is just on all sides of the equation.
I mean, just generally, the biggest problem with a transition of any business is that everybody involved hates change. Everybody. And it's not that the change necessarily means bad. If you do it right, it can mean lots of good things, but they just hate it anyway.
Right.
So if you're in the business for 2 years, you're no longer change. You're just part of the background. So when it's handed over to you, they're like, yeah, all right, yeah, okay. No big deal. Old man's leaving. Good deal. Didn't like him anyway.
Yeah. No, it's so true and something, trust is key. We kind of touched on this, but step three, just de-risk.
Yeah. So now, instead of a whatever period due diligence, and hey, listen, just as an aside, I've heard lots of people advocating and offering 30-day due diligences. If you're doing 30 days due diligence, you're asking for trouble. I'm just telling you that right now. But whatever your due diligence is, this is like a 2-year due diligence. You're going to find out where the bodies are buried and how to bury them and where the saltpeter is and how we keep all that quiet. And you're going to learn everything about how the money flows through the business. So due diligence is an afterthought because you've already got all the knowledge of where everything is. So the financial risks are not that they won't be there because every small business operates in a unique fashion, but you'll at least know exactly how it operates and how the money flows. You'll know what that third extra LLC was used for and why we have it. You'll know that, oh, by the way, all of the equipment is over in this other company over here entirely and why we do it that way. And so you learn all of these things all the way through. So you don't have, I mean, you still have financial risk, but you don't have the surprise financial risk of discovering that, something, the crazy stuff that sometimes these small businesses do.
Yeah, and just to piggyback on the 30-day due diligence, I run a due diligence firm and we do dozens of engagements annually. It's best practice for at least 60 to 90 days. Unfortunately, I have seen the 30-day due diligence, and more often than not, in the event these transactions close, which appears, fantastic, there are many skeletons that come out after that 30-day period. Ultimately, it depends on your level of risk, your risk tolerance, if you're willing to, accept that level of risk for a shorter period of time. Some people do like a quicker diligence period
Sure.
for, more favorable terms, etc. But it's a trade-off. In small business acquisitions, it's one of the riskiest asset classes for a reason. Take your time, conduct thorough due diligence. Um, you know, if it, I always say due diligence needs to take as long as it does, until you're able to get comfort over kind of de-risking every area possible.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, all of the different things operationally, you now know what those, I mean, again, most of it, usually, I'm going to say usually, it's not anybody's trying to hide anything from you. They're not trying to, fool you. It's just that the business works in a weird way because it just happened this way over time. Why do we have a 16-step process to take an order? Because at one time, this person did it this way, and this person did it that way, and this person did it this way. And so we ended up here. But if you step in and you see a process, you assume it's a three-step order process, and you don't understand this is a 16 step. And so all of your plans for the order process are going to be wrong until you understand the whole process. Being inside, you've seen it all, and you've probably even helped to fix some of it while you're there.
Right.
And then customers, yeah. So you know what the customers are like. You know, it's no longer a surprise when this one customer is going to go to 120 to 180 days because that's what they do. And hey, by the way, if I'm going to say somebody I knew real well did an acquisition where near the point where some AR was going to go into the danger territory, they canceled the invoices and rewrote them so they came in as 0 to 30 days. Uh, that's fraud, by the way. But beside that, the actual operations and who you can trust and who you can't, and you know which customers are going to hold you hostage and which customers won't. You know the good customers who actually have the margin are, and hey, let me be honest here. One of the biggest values you can bring to a small business is if you figure at least every product line, if not every customer, what their actual margin is per product line and per customer, because they've never figured it out. And that's hugely valuable to the owner if he knew it. Doing that kind of work while you're there adds so much value that they love that you're there.
Yeah, and one thing to de-risk in terms of customers, since you brought up changing invoices, is just understanding what the customer mix looks like. And in practice, like how do I do this on a daily basis or monthly basis, is putting together a simple table of like top customers and going line by line and just asking the current ownership team about the customers. So who are they? What do you do for them? Just like very basic questions. Then you understand like what are the terms? How long does it take to complete a project? So these are just things. These are fact-finding questions you can ask to hopefully spot some of these risks of changing invoice dates or significantly aged receivables. Because you mentioned it. I see a lot of aged receivables being sitting on these small business books due to ignorance to write these off or the unwillingness to accept that they won't be paid on them. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
Regardless, accounts receivable and customers comes into play of working capital, which is a key component of these deals. So if you're currently, under LOI for a business and you have working capital as part of your deal, make sure you understand what the customers look like, what the receivables look like, because ultimately this is going to be cash in current liquidity in your pocket, which you'll need during the transition time. So this is in closing, that's how it actually impacts your deal.
Definitely, definitely. And so there's so many businesses that have, long delivery processes that have no idea, as an example, just something we see in our industries a lot. They have no idea how to do work in progress accounting.
Right.
So the way it actually looks on accounting is very different than it actually is. If you had, okay, here are invoices toward work in progress, here's what's left, here's the costs. They should be doing it that way, but so few do that your accounting is going to be jacked up. But again, this way you're inside, you understand what the delivery cycle looks like and how things are paid. So even if you don't have work in progress accounting, you know what the cash flow looks like during that period.
Yeah, and cash flow and the ability to meet debt payments is another key component of this whole de-risking factor. Hopefully, if you uh, take the unconventional path, I'll call it, not saying bad, unconventional path of assuming this chief of staff role, you should have a good handle or hopefully have a good handle on the cash flow of the business. Um, because, the SBA or a traditional bank is going to be scrutinizing your financial performance. So your ability to make debt payments is, the number one priority along with, sustaining that health of the business. Um,
Something we do when we go into a new business, one of the things we implement is we regularly review, as in initially it's weekly, a 16-week cash flow plan that has all the invoices and all the payments and all of it on there. And it's done by the accounting firm, hopefully there's an accounting firm. but it's done by whoever does the financials. But it shows, what your cash flow looks like every month or every week for 16 weeks. And so you can see where there's an obvious hole. Most small businesses don't do that. And if you were to step in and provide that to that owner, that would be hugely valuable to them. And it'll also help you understand what that cash flow looks like throughout the year so that, like you said, when you get to the SBA, you can say, yeah, I've been managing the cash flow model for 2 years. I know exactly how the money moves.
Yeah, and that's a good point. And fortunately, I've seen other financial individuals or leaders of firms post free templates about cash flow, like weekly cash flow templates, 12 week, 16 week. And I've actually looked at some of them and they're highly valuable. So, if you're listening and you think this is a good idea, believe it or not, there's a lot of people who are just willing to give you a free template with a
Mhm.
video. So I would encourage you to explore resources on LinkedIn or Google to try to find one of these templates because they're quite simple and very valuable.
Yeah. I mean, because they don't understand, they don't get it. The current owner just understands how the business operates. Let me give you an example. I'm going to lengthen things. Sorry. We're talking to a seller right now who, up until very recently, this is construction related. When it came to doing a quote for a customer, he would get the RFP in. Nobody else would touch it. He would look through it, go, yeah, okay, I see what they're doing. Yeah, okay, it's about this. All right, yeah, all right, good, good, good. And that's going to be about this much. Now, this guy's got 20 plus years in the industry and he can do that. You, as a brand new person, probably cannot. So you've got all this ability to create a quote in his head that's nowhere else. It doesn't exist anywhere. And he just started to put in he just brought in a guy who's putting in a process now that actually computerizes the bidding process, and it uses, it doesn't use even AI yet, but just operating with a system that can do the quote building instead of the owner's brain. And what they've already found out is, again, he's working with the person because he's looking to sell and he's a smart guy. So what they've already found out is he could have won a bunch more business if he reduced his quote, and he would have made the margin he was looking for anyway. But they would have increased their price by 25, increased their sales by at least 25% the last year, just by using a quoting system and not his, finger in the air method, which again works fine. And he's made a very successful business doing that. But you don't have that finger yet since you haven't done this for 20 years. So, that kind of process is what you can be learning while you're doing this, and it makes a huge difference.
Yeah, and it really, it transitions nicely into, step four, which is to buy smarter.
So absolutely. So better terms, and people frequently will come to me and say, so can it be done this way? Can it be done that way? And the answer is, as I keep saying, it can be any way you two agree on. Any way, literally anything you two agree on can happen. So the more you know about how other deals were done, the better terms you have in the back of your head to be able to stitch this thing together. Absolutely true. So keep learning all of that and how other people have done their deals. But really, any idea you can pop into your head, if you can convince them that this is the way to go, because it benefits both of you, you throw that on paper. That you can absolutely make that happen. So now in this process, doing your 12 or 24-month term in the company, you now know what terms you need to have in the agreement. Because you know that, you know, Acme down the street pays in 180 days if they're lucky, and you know where the AR sits for each of the customers, and so maybe there are terms you need to put into the agreement that are around that. Maybe Acme adjusts their terms with the amount of attention they're given by the owner. Great. So now we're going to have a term that involves an earnout that is about how Acme pays, or assuming Acme does that, a lot of them probably do that. So now it's of the owner's interest to pay more attention to them and get them to pay. But you know what the tweaks are that you need to put terms around to firm up in order to make sure that you get a successful acquisition.
Yeah, it's so true. And you know, for negotiating with knowledge and like the full confidence and a successful close, I guess how do these all kind of relate to each other? Like what is like one takeaway from just the pitch to buy smarter?
So the bottom line is what we spend a whole lot of time and money on, which is the due diligence process. The whole purpose is you want to get complete knowledge, which is impossible, right? It is not possible to get complete knowledge about a business within 30, 60, 90 days. I don't care. You cannot understand absolutely everything in the way they've done everything and the way they're going to do everything. Um, so understanding the business completely is your best position for negotiating because you know what you're actually getting. The whole deal with negotiating a deal is the owner knows what he's selling. You don't really know all of what you're buying, and you've got to mitigate risk throughout that negotiation. Um, so the more you understand, and again, you're still not going to have perfect knowledge after 2 years, but you're going to understand 90% of it. So now you know how to negotiate better because you understand exactly or close to exactly what you're getting. Whereas, those of us that still operate off the street and talking to some guy in a business, there's a lot of things that are hidden under the covers that we may not notice until we get there. Um, Being there already, you have that nearly complete knowledge, so you can write a much more, what I'll call nearly perfect agreement.
Gotcha. So if we take a step back and we think about the original terms, you mentioned some sort of agreement. So is there really just two types of like two agreements? Like the first one and then the one near closing? What does that look like?
So, in my opinion, if you again, let's say you found the company you want to do this with. There is a single agreement at the front, so you're still negotiating a purchase agreement in order to make this thing go. Now, again, the price might be based on a formula instead of a strict price, but you're still negotiating all of those terms, but no agreement is complete until you close, and the closing is delayed effectively by 2 years. But all of these terms apply. So now, as you get closer to 2 years, you can say, "Hey, by the way, I know every other week that our general manager threatens to quit. I'm going to roll that into our terms here because that needs to be part of our agreement." And you'll know the things you need to add to it before official close. So you really have kind of a signed agreement. It is a signed agreement that obviously there will be a lot of flexibility in it, but there are also penalties that will last for those 2 years until you get your first payment out. But you can also craft the agreement so that you can adjust the agreement as you go. Just again, little clauses that you're going to add for your own security. And the owner can do the same thing. The owner's, you know, you don't show up at his office until 9:45, and everybody else is there at 9 o'clock. In the agreement, he's going to write in, you need to show up 9 o'clock.
Right.
Whatever it is, you can do those things, but you've got the framework to start with, and the finalized agreement to sign at closing. Again, the framework tells you what you're buying and how much effectively, what the basic terms are. And the final agreement fills in, does the thing we still do near closing, which is, we do red lines back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. This is effectively can be a 2 year red line period where you're crafting the specific clauses specific to that business, and the owner can say, well, you're screwed up this way, so I want a clause for that.
Yeah. So I think that the two takeaways are a two-prong approach and then kind of continuous communication between the initial agreement, um, you know, good faith to both cooperate and work together in a collaborative environment during this period, and then come to a full agreement at the transition period,
Mhm.
which that makes sense, and that can certainly lead to a more fruitful close and just maintaining the health of the business. So, the buy smart strategy for step four, it certainly makes sense.
Absolutely. And if you're not that person, if you're not the negotiation and agreements person, I mean, you'll need to be eventually, but that's okay. Instead, slide into some other ETA person that's got an acquisition now, and you can be the chief of staff there, or talk to PE firms and say, listen, I'll work for, I mean, I would call it cheap. I don't know what cheap means to everybody, but I'll work for cheap as your chief of staff for your next acquisition because I really want to learn what's going on. And I want to make myself a great candidate to be your next operator. Uh, they want that too, right? Because their risk is if they pick an operator who turns out to be awful, that's bad for their business, and they're operating off of other people's money. So if you're not that person, go to a PE, go to another ETA, make those positions. You don't have to worry as much about the contract, and you still get that experience.
Yeah, and you brought up something, and we spoke about it on our pre-call. What makes like the best operator? Like, what are
So,
the tangibles?
so the best operator is going to be, I still say the number one skill for anybody on the planet, but especially an operator, is going to be negotiation. The ability to negotiate in a way that doesn't end the relationship is the number one skill you can learn. But also, you've got to understand how small business P&Ls work. You've got to be able to read them and understand what those pieces are. If you don't understand small business financials and you're running a small business, it's only a matter of time before you run that ship aground. If you've got an awesome financial person, that's great, but they can take advantage of you if you don't know what you're looking at.
Yeah.
You've got to have experience. Again, this is our operator, right? You've got to have experience running at least a division of a company. You've got to have had, ideally, at least one layer of management below you and running people. That experience itself is going to replicate itself anywhere you go, where you're managing people and they're managing people. If you've done that before and been responsible for the P&L of that unit, you're going to be ready to do this job easily. Now, I admit there's not a lot of people like that, but that's the ideal person we're looking for.
So it sounds like P&L experience and the ability to negotiate. So for those of you who say, well, I don't have either of those, two tips for you. I highly recommend Never Split the Difference by Chris Voss, I
Mm-hmm.
believe his name.
Mm-hmm.
When I stood up my M&A boutique advisory firm, I was quite bad at negotiations and sales in general. And that was an exceptional framework. So if you are like me a few years ago, I highly recommend reading that book. It kind of changed the way I think about business and negotiations in general. Any good resources for people that you find?
Start from No is a good one. And I can't remember the guy's name. Is he right here? Don't see him. But Start from No is a great book for negotiation. Um, uh, what are some of the better ones I've read? Those are probably two of the best ones. But you're going to use negotiation everywhere. If you decide, forget this, I'm going to go be an employee, negotiation is going to help you because even if you're just negotiating your employment, everybody's thinking, well, I'm gonna negotiate for more money. Well, sometimes, especially bigger companies, they've got a band and you can't move in that band. You're where you are. Okay, you can even ask them, what else do you have to negotiate with? Vacation, other days off, working from home, any number of other things that are they can use all day long, and their upper management doesn't care. But they may not be able to give salary, and so everybody stops at salary and go, well, okay, that's all it was. The biggest thing you learn in negotiation is look at the whole picture and figure out, okay, if this is immovable, maybe I can get this, this, and that.
Yeah, and start with No is written by Jim Camp, as I
There you
look
go.
on Amazon. So you can add that to your cart this afternoon. I will because I haven't read that book, and I'm always looking to refine my craft. So that's a good nugget. So, kind of wrapping up some key takeaways. What do you want to touch on?
So I think as an alternative to the standard ETA methodology, seeking to be a number two in a company is a excellent way to invest a year or two that makes you the best candidate to run the next company. Which, listen, you're gonna have a long career. It doesn't matter what you're doing. A couple years here and there, if you're worried about that, you're gonna be sadly disappointed in your long career because there are some years that go really badly for you. But if you invest a year or two in this second in command, you are going to be way better off buying businesses forevermore just from getting that experience early instead of, when the SBA is calling and said, "Hey, we're waiting for that payment. It doesn't seem to have gone through, and now you have no money in the bank and you've got to make something out of nothing." And I mean, that's a crucible that a lot of people learn from, but it's better this other way, where you can pick up some great tips for some people, some great operators out there, and you'll become better for it.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, and I think when we touched upon it, and I'll take number two is, small business acquisitions is highly trust based, in my opinion. I mentioned the trust test. You're going to be tested. Are you honest? Are you trustworthy in these small businesses? So if you are a buyer looking to purchase a business or pursue this path, the more honest and open you can be, in my opinion, the better off you'll be in the long term. On the flip side, look for those intangibles in the seller or business you want to buy. Um, Unfortunately, there are some bad eggs in small business acquisitions that are looking to pull one over on you, and they're looking for a liquidity event, regardless of the turmoil or fires they have to burn to get to that liquidity event. So just be careful about that. And ways you can avoid that is risk mitigation. Work with a good deal team, partner up with someone in a search. Don't do this alone or DIY, because that can cause a lot of your risk factors to increase.
Mhm.
So that's kind of building trust. What about that's also kind of number three. Anything to add on the risk?
So again, the more you know about how things operate, the more you know where the risks are that you need to mitigate, which is the real question. Um, Reducing risk, any lawyer can say, well, we can bound this statement by doing this. Great. But if you don't know where the risk sits in a company, you can bound this statement wherever you want, and the risk was really up here all along. Um, Knowing where to spot the risk is a huge piece of that, and operating in that business is going to give you a lot better view of where the risks actually are.
Yeah, I agree. Conducting your own set of due diligence and understanding the business you're buying or thinking about buying, you are only as good as your level of effort. Um, Certainly, a third party can come in and give you a report, but if you don't understand what that report means, or again, if they're looking uh, over there and the hockey puck is on the other side of the rink, you're never going to find these risks.
Mm-hmm.
And there's dozens of clever phrases or analogies to kind of speak to that. So it's important.
Absolutely.
Um, and then, just kind of wrapping up, the smarter purchase, better deals. Anything to add?
So realistically, your best deal is the one that is priced well for what you're getting. And the biggest challenge, and again, why we hire due diligence and everybody else ought to be hiring due diligence, is because you often don't know what exactly you're getting in there. So how do you price that properly? So being able to identify the key elements of those companies that you can acquire to even know what the value is, to pay the right value. Because if you overpay, you're in a hole. If you underpay, you're probably just going to be outbid by somebody. Knowing all those pieces enables you to make the right, I'll say, make the right offer. And whether they accept it or not doesn't matter, because the right offer is, I know I can operate the business profitably here. And if they don't want to accept that offer, then they would like me to operate the business unprofitably, and I choose no. I'll move on to the next one.
Right. Yeah, many, many good takeaways. In essence, you want to, if you're looking to buy a small business and you think about pursuing this path of working inside the business first, again, two-prong approach, establishing terms or a loose purchase agreement of what that looks like with yourself and the owner. Um, Through your trust period, whether it's 6, 12, 18, 24 months, you look to build trust and establish a clear framework of what the transition period looks like and the change of ownership hands, um, you know, how that's going to function to sustain the business operations. And ultimately, that leads to a reduction in risk and a smarter purchase as by yourself, the buyer, and really, this legacy seller, the benefits to him or her is that the business that they worked very hard to create and sustain for, 10, 20, 30 years will be in good hands, going forward. So that's kind of the point of this, proposition to buy a business this way, um, is to maintain that legacy and kind of continue going forward.